Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is a little bit different. I'm in my own backyard. I know it doesn't look like much of a backyard. I live in an apartment, okay? But I'm joining you from the backyard today, and I wanted to answer some questions. These questions were actually left to me by a commenter, so thank you so much for asking these. And I thought I would make a video about it because I realized I never actually spoke about how I ended up in Australia, why I ended up Australia, etc. I've talked about it on my TikTok channel, my other social media, and Instagram, but I've never actually talked about it here. I've just kind of used it as a travel platform. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about why I moved to Australia. Sorry, I hear my cat. Why I moved to Australia, why I stayed in Melbourne, and then I thought I'd also add how I moved to Australia, because if you know anything about immigrating, you've done it yourself, or you know anyone who has, it's not as easy as just packing your bags and going. It's quite complicated, and it's not cheap either. This is probably going to be a fairly short one today because I just want to answer these questions, and I'm kind of doing this off the top of my head. I took a couple notes of things I wanted to mention, but for the most part I'm doing this off the top of my head, so you know, it's not going to be the longest. I'm not going to be yapping for 30 minutes. If you have more questions, I will happily answer them, but that's all I've got right now. So having said all that, let's get into it, and let's start with why I decided to leave the USA and move to Australia. Basically, I was living in Chicago. I was working as a nurse. I was having, the time of my life, if I'm being honest. I love Chicago. It's the best. But in America, it's not really common to take gap years or to take time off to travel at all. I mean, little vacations here and there, but not extended travel at all. Like, you don't travel after you graduate high school. It's very rare, I should say. So it never even crossed my mind. The thought never even crossed my mind. But I went on my regular annual leave. I went somewhere in Europe, and I ended up meeting an American nurse who quit her job and did just that. She did a gap year traveling all around Europe. She eventually moved to Australia as well. But at the time I was like, it honestly blew my mind. I just didn't, it sounds so stupid, but I didn't think you could do that because it's so uncommon in America. Like, I didn't know anyone in my circle who had done that before, except for maybe a study abroad situation. So I'd never even thought of that. And then when I met her, I was like, wow, because I love to travel, but I would only do it, you don't get to very often. So when I heard her story and the fact that she was also an American nurse, I realized, I mean, why, if she can, why not me? So I did just that. I went back to Chicago, I made plans, I saved up money, and decided that was going to be maybe a year of traveling. So fast forward, after saving a bunch of money, I hopped on a plane to Europe. I thought about maybe this summer and kind of just taking it basically as far as I could between my money and my time until I didn't want to anymore. So I got to Europe. And if you know Australians, you know how much they love to travel. For them, gap years are incredibly common. And so there are Australians all over Europe. I mean, all over the world, really. They're everywhere. So I made a bunch of Australian friends. I spent the whole summer with them, and they were going back to Melbourne. So I thought, why not go to Australia? I never thought about going to Australia before. So I just thought I'd continue my travels and see my friends that I'd made. So I'll tell you how I ended up moving later. But first, I applied for my visa, I think maybe in September, and I got my acceptance in October. And so that's about when I came. I hopped on a plane. I thought I'd be there for no more than like a summer, 6 months tops, and then 7 years later, almost 8, here I am, still in Melbourne, Australia. So that's why. And so why did I stay in Melbourne? Why did I choose Melbourne out of Australia to stay in? Well, Melbourne, believe it or not, is actually really, really similar to Chicago. Now, obviously, it's not identical. Not everything is exactly the same. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a lot of similarities. So it was pretty easy to integrate. Like, even the city looks similar. There's a river that runs through it. The city is built like a grid system. Even north and south have distinct personalities. So Melbourne and Chicago, it was a pretty easy integration, aside from the fact that, immigrating is hard in general. But Melbourne also just has a ton going on for it. There's a great food scene. There's always festivals. When things happen in Australia, like artists come for concerts, etc., you can guarantee something's going to be happening in Melbourne. So I really like that because, I mean, I immigrated when I was 25. I'm still quite young. I mean, I'm still young, but I'm not really ready to live a quiet life per se. So I definitely still wanted to live that city life. Having said that, especially in the beginning when I didn't know that I was going to stay, I saw lots of Australia. I didn't just come to Melbourne and stay in Melbourne. I mean, I've been all up and down the East Coast. I've done the West Coast as well, from Broome through Carragini down to Albany or Esperance, whichever is further south. I did a road trip around Tasmania. I've seen quite a bit. I never wanted to get stuck in Melbourne, but that's just kind of the way it is. I mean, I really loved it. So as I said before, I thought I'd be here for a summer, and then that summer kind of blew out to 6 months, and then it became a year and 2 years, and here we are. I have mostly lived in Melbourne that whole time, with a brief interlude in rural WA, but that was part of my visa stipulations. Melbourne just has so much going on for it. I don't know, there's a lot to do, and I've got a lot of friends here. I think community really was the biggest reason. So anyways, that's Melbourne. That's why I chose Melbourne. Let's move on to how I actually immigrated, because as I touched on before, it's not easy, nor is it cheap. You can't just like decide one day and move on the next day. What do I know? Okay, so before I get into it too much, I do want to give a bit of a caveat. This is just my experience. My experience is not identical to anyone else's experience. I'm an American who immigrated to Australia. If you're seeing this and you're interested in immigrating, or you've done it before and you immigrated to Canada, or from Canada to Brazil, or whatever, your experience is going to be completely different. Your visa stipulations are going to be completely different. Even if you are an American who's also moving to Australia, your situation probably won't look exactly like mine. There are lots of different routes that one can take when they want to immigrate, and somebody might not be eligible for all those routes. So this is just how I did it. This might work for you if you're interested, but I can't guarantee that it will. When in doubt, I'm not an immigration lawyer. I'm just a girl who immigrated. So when in doubt, if you want to do it or you have questions beyond, surface level recommendations, you should probably seek help from an immigration lawyer, because I'm just a girl on YouTube, okay? So I can answer what I did, but it's not necessarily going to be what you should do. Okay, that's the caveat. Let's move on. So for me personally, I originally came on what's called a working holiday visa. That's a subclass 462. For Australia, there are, at least at the time, there are two versions of the working holiday visa. Each one has different countries that are eligible. So for obvious reasons, I went for the visa that Americans are eligible. I think the other one has a lot more European countries. I think it's more Commonwealth. I'm not sure. But anyways, I was the 462, I believe. As the working holiday visa is a temporary visa, this is not a permanent solution. It's pretty easy and it's pretty cheap. At the time that I applied, I think it was about $500 US. Granted, this was like 2016, 2017, so I'm sure it's gone up since then, but that's about what I paid. And it was really simple, if I'm being honest. I just plugged in my information. I had to prove that I had a certain amount of money in the bank. You need to prove that you have a certain amount of savings. I believe it was about $10,000. I put in my application, all my details, passport details, and I actually got an instant acceptance. I don't think that happens for everybody. I think it is fairly common though. So I got an instant acceptance. I've had friends that maybe had 48 hours later they found out, or even up to a week, but mine was instant. So I applied in mid-September and I was on a plane with my backpack by mid-October. As I said before, I did not think I was going to be there for more than a summer. That summer kind of blew out from 6 months to a year, etc. Now with the working holiday visa, as I touched on, it's only a temporary visa. When I applied, if you get accepted, it's a year that you're given. You can do certain tasks, I guess is the word. I don't know. If you meet certain criteria and do certain things, you might be eligible for an extra year or even an extra 2 years. For me, I got an extra year on that working holiday visa by living in rural WA that I mentioned earlier. So I lived in a town called Carnarvon and I worked at a bar because I was above a certain line. It was the Tropic of Capricorn. So essentially where Australia turns into tropics, regional Australia essentially. If I worked there, I don't know why, but if I worked there, I got eligible for a second year. So I did that. I did that for also about 3 months, if I remember correctly. It was pretty fun, if I'm being honest. I can talk about that in another video about what working in regional Australia is like, because it was not what I was expected, but ultimately a positive experience. And then once I did that, I applied for a second year. Again, you have to pay a fee. Some countries are eligible for a third year, but I don't really know all the details. Also, you have to be under a certain age. You need to check for yourself, but that's how I did it. So anyways, the working holiday visa, I do my 2 years now. My visa is almost up. I am still not ready to leave Australia. How do I stay? Well, let me tell you, there's a couple different options. Again, these are not all the options, but when I looked into it, if you are in a serious relationship with an Australian, you might be eligible for the partner visa, which is very expensive, by the way, but a partner visa. Or if you want to study at university in Australia, you might be eligible for a student visa, also very expensive. I, however, because I was a nurse in Chicago and a nurse working in Australia, I was eligible for the skilled migrant visa, which I believe is the 189. So to give a little context about the skilled migrant visa, essentially Australia has a list of professions that they need for whatever reason. Aren't enough nurses, or they need somebody who's highly specialized in an area of research or mining, it can be anything. There's like a list of professions. As I mentioned, nursing was on that list. They even specify specifically what kind of nurses they're looking for, and mine was on that list. Now, the thing about that is the list changes every year in like March or July. So if you, let's say, want to study something to ensure that you get a permanent visa, you can't actually ensure that you're going to get a permanent visa at the end, because you might study a profession that's on that list and it's a 2-year degree, a 3-year degree. By the time you graduate, they take it off that list. So it's a bit complicated. I was eligible for the nursing section of the skilled migrant visa, and it was a pretty complicated process. It was also fairly expensive, if I'm being honest. This is sort of where things get complicated. Even if you see that your job is on that list, you can't just apply, pay your fee, and wait. You have to put in an expression of interest. So essentially what I did is I said that, I'm a nurse in this specialty. I had proof that I was a nurse in that specialty. I had so many years experience. I proved that my age, I didn't have a criminal background, all these things. And essentially every little bit that you put towards this application, this expression of interest, gives you a certain amount of points. And it's a points-based system. So the more points you have, the more likely that you're going to get this visa. So I put in my application, and I have to say, hey, this is what I can bring to the table. This is what I bring to Australia. And they have to actually ask you to apply. So it's almost like the expression of interest is an application before the application. Some other things to get more points: you can take an English test to prove that you speak a certain level of English. I'm trying to remember, I think certain ages, like the younger you are, the higher the points value. If you're bringing people with you, for example, children or a spouse, I think that's potentially lower, like it's not as worth as many points as if you're coming on your own, stuff like that. So I did all of that. The expression of interest, from what I remember, was free. The actual expression of interest was free, aside from what it took to gather all of my information. I put that forward to the Australian government, and you just have to wait, and you have to wait until they say, okay, yeah, you can apply. They then said, all right, you're eligible to apply. And then I put towards the actual application for the subclass 189. So that application was fairly easy because the expression of interest was mostly where I gathered all the information. The only additional things that I really had to do, from what I remember, is a background check. I had to take a medical test to prove that I'm not coming over just to use the medical system. And I think that's where I paid my fee as well. Now, the fee wasn't terrible, but it's fairly expensive. Again, this was like 7 years ago. I think it was maybe around $4,000. The problem is all the other stuff that you have to do on top of it kind of added up. The medical test itself was maybe like $700. I had to do all these background checks. The background checks cost whatever it was they cost, but you also have to get fingerprints with the background checks, and those fingerprints cost money. And you have to do fingerprints for every state that you lived in or every country you lived in. So little things added up. I took an English test as well. I just wanted to get as many points as I could. So that English test was, I think, like $500. Like it just added up. Again, this was in like 2017, so it's probably even more expensive now. So I put my expression of interest in, and I think I got the invitation to apply maybe like 8 months later. And then once I gathered all that information, which took me about 6 months to gather, I put forward my application. Once I did that, it was pretty quick. I think I got 6 months later, I got my PR, permanent residency. So once you get your skilled migrant visa, it's straight away to permanent residency, which is like the same as a green card. If you're an American watching this, it's basically the same as a green card. So after that, you have almost all of the same rights as an Australian. I just can't vote. And then 2 years later, I got my citizenship, and that's basically how I stayed. That's all a very simplistic version. Again, it's probably not going to look the same for you, and you should probably speak to a lawyer. But that's how I did it several years ago, mind you, several years ago. Okay, so those are 3 quick answers to explain how I, an American, ended up here in Australia, how I got my double citizenship, and why I stayed. I think that's all I have to say right now. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I can do more videos like this if anyone's interested. I just didn't think anyone would be interested. So if you are, give this a thumbs up, comment so I can know. Otherwise, that's really all I have to say for now, except for one final thing, which is a really big thank you. I started this channel just for fun because I like traveling and I like exploring my city. I just thought, I have all this footage, I may as well put it on YouTube. I like editing anyways. I don't do this to make money. I don't do this because I'm trying to be social media famous. I just do it because I like it. So all in all, that's to say thank you for being here. I've built a really cool community. There's just a handful of us, but I think it's really interesting, the fact, and quite cool that I just started making these videos for fun. I don't advertise this channel on my other social media accounts that are frankly bigger than this. I don't tell my friends or family about this channel. As I said, I just do this for fun, so I'm really thankful that you want to follow along and join me. And if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to ask. Otherwise, give this a like, comment if this was helpful in any other way. I also put my other social media accounts in my description, and it's in my bio, so take a look if you want to. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Bye!